If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Matt Blunt spent a good part of his life in public service, whether it be in the U.S. Navy, the Missouri House, the Secretary of State's office, or the Missouri governorship. And few would make an argument that Blunt wasn't consequential in Missouri's politics or policy. Blunt joins us for a very special edition of Politically Speaking, where he talks about his legacy and his current role advocating for the big three automakers. Let's hit the music.
This is Politically Speaking, the longest-running episodic podcast about Missouri politics.
It's a little complicated in Bolivar because there is a Parsons family there.
But we also knew that it was important to make sure that we got to where we needed to go.
You know, if you walk in a room and you're getting ready to make a decision and everybody in the room looks like you need to stop.
And right now what happens in the United States Senate is as critical as anywhere else in the country.
I really want the state to succeed.
Well, we want everybody to know that we're all working together.
I just worked hard to try to build my name where I didn't have the money.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a political correspondent with St. Louis Public Radio, returning after a 3-month absence to this glorious podcast we have.
Is co-founder, semi-correspondent right now, Joe Mannies.
Well, there's a reason we're bringing Joe back, because, and I'm not just sucking up to you, Governor. I have never been as excited to do a show with yours. So that's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure.
But our guest today is
Matt Blunt, former governor of Missouri.
First of all, I like having former governors on the show. I think that they can provide a lot of insight into executive leadership and the history of Missouri. But also, I mean, it's very special for me because you were governor during the first couple years of my professional career, and I'm getting just a lot of nostalgia right now. I'm sure Joe's getting a lot of nostalgia, too.
Oh, yeah. Although it's a little different. I mean, I am excited about Matt Blunt being here as well, although not as excited as Jason. Most exciting one for me was Kit Bond, as far as, so no offense, but
none taken.
But I think this is great. I think we're hoping to have a real, it's going to be fast-paced because of your time, discussion about your present, your past, how that's affected, past as governor, how that's affected things, kind of your observations, and also about your great tie. Apparently you actually design ties in your, as a sideline, or have done that?
Well, I've had a tie designed that I could give to people when I was governor that had some of the emblems of the state, and they've become popular with some of my friends that are now in the Missouri Senate and the Capitol.
Yeah.
Did you keep any?
You know what? They were so popular that I have given the last one away. Though I think there is an effort underway to recast these ties.
Yeah. By the way, the person that showed me the tie was Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, who you only kickstarted his political career by appointing him to the Transportation Commission.
Yeah, but they still don't have any sort of portrait or anything of you in the Capitol yet, do they?
No, but we're working on it.
Okay.
It's a delayed fulfillment of that obligation.
So they have the tie, but not you.
It will be done. I'll be there.
I'm sorry I've been harassing you about that, but I do feel your place in history needs to be secured in the Missouri Capitol. But let's talk about your current role, because it's not like you have been lazy or inactive out of politics. In fact, you have a very important role advocating for the big three automakers now. Just kind of explain what you do right now.
Sure. So I'm the president of what's called the American Automotive Policy Council, which is a small trade association that focuses really almost entirely on trade issues for Fiat Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors. And you might wonder why you'd have a trade association just to focus on trade. And it's because autos are such a widely traded commodity. A good chunk of global trade is in the automotive sector. We export more cars and parts from the United States than anything else. It's about $140 billion a year. So it's very important to our companies, because we export about 1 out of 5 vehicles that we make in the United States get exported, and trying to ensure that other markets remain open is important to us.
Now, it's kind of interesting that you ended up with the auto industry as a Republican, as a fiscal conservative. I mean, there would be some who would say that may not be a good fit, at least early on, because the auto industry is very strong labor component. The leaders have often been politically mixed. Kind of how did you end up in that? And then we'll segue into how your past kind of affected this.
Sure. Well, they'd actually reached out to me about if I'd be interested in the position a couple of years after I left office. So I started February 1 of 2011. But, it's an important industry for the country. It's a good percentage of our GDP. About 3% of our GDP is in the auto sector. And really, it is an important sort of foundation for all of manufacturing in the United States. And, of course, Missouri is an auto state, like a lot of states, with a Ford and General Motors presence, and certainly a lot of automotive suppliers. In most states, or many states, the automotive suppliers is the largest component of their manufacturing. And actually, I think that's true in Missouri as well.
Yeah, how have the Trump tariffs affected things? Have you been involved in either reacting to him, trying to block them, or whatever?
So we're extremely involved with what the president is trying to do on trade. We are very dependent on trade, as I mentioned, and the administration's trying to do a lot of things that we think need to be done. So, for example, in the new NAFTA, there's a currency provision, which we've long called for having currency provisions as a part of free trade agreements. There's the strongest language on standards that we've ever had in a free trade agreement. And that's important because we're really in a battle with the Europeans to keep other foreign markets open for our products. The Europeans do a very good job of convincing other countries to accept products built to their standards, and when they do that, they can have the effect of closing those markets to products built to U.S. standards. And the administration has done a good job on that. I mean, as with a lot of things, people, sometimes quibble with the tactics of the administration, but certainly the goals and objectives are very closely aligned with where we've thought trade policy should be for a number of years.
Yeah, I read a book by Bob Woodward about the president, and one of the major aspects, I don't know if you've read the particular book I'm talking about, but one of the conflicts that was in the administration was there were a lot of stalwart Republican people that were brought in to deal with trade policy who boisterously disagreed with the president on trade because it's so different from what George W. Bush did or maybe what Mitt Romney would have advocated for. How has his differences of philosophy on trade kind of affected your current role, and has it been a good working relationship, or has it been kind of difficult to navigate what for many Republicans is a major shift in thinking?
Yeah, I think it is a major shift in thinking that I think probably has long-term implications for the Republican Party. But the administration, as you point out, has lots of different voices in terms of trade policy. So we try and talk to all those folks about our concerns. Again, we have a lot that the administration's trying to do that we entirely agree with. We think the new NAFTA is better than the old NAFTA. We're strong supporters of it. We think it's done a number of things that are important for really our industry, and we believe it will actually, force lots of investment in the United States in the auto sector, significant new sourcing of U.S. parts for vehicles built in North America, and lead to the creation of tens of thousands of jobs.
Now, in your role, do you engage a lot with members of Congress? Do you talk to your dad, who's the senior senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt, just so folks know? Just kind of what's your typical day like, and who do you reach out to?
So we typically deal with a lot of sometimes technical issues that exist in foreign countries. So we spend a lot of time, for example, in technical issues in the Middle East. And I've traveled to the United Arab Emirates to meet with regulators in that country to talk about some of the regulations they were establishing. We export about 200,000 vehicles a year to the Middle East and North Africa. Our primary points of contact actually are in the administration, the departments of commerce. The U.S. Trade Representative's Office is probably the most important agency that we interact with on a regular basis. Because we track currency so much, we deal with the Treasury and meet with the Treasury with some regularity. If we think economies that have a history of manipulating their currency, such as Japan or Korea, are doing something in the marketplace that's keeping the market from setting the currency exchange rate. We spend a lot of time in a sort of a global forum that's called the Working Party 29 that meets in Geneva regularly. So either I or folks that work in the office with me travel to Geneva with some regularity to participate in those meetings.
So how did your career in public service, which not only includes being governor, but also Secretary of State, a member of the Missouri House, and serving in the U.S. Navy, prepare you for your current role?
Well, and before you answer, I just want to make it clear for our listeners. You were Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005. When you became governor, you were governor one term from 2005 to early 2009. You'd been in the State House for one or two terms.
One term. I've never been reelected to any office.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought, although sometimes by choice. And then, that said, go ahead.
Yeah, always by choice in my situation. I think it gave me a sense of, just a sense of some sense of how government works. The federal government doesn't work in the same way the state government works, but it gave me a sense of that. I think state government moves a little faster, so you have to learn to be a little more patient when you're interacting with the federal government, and that was, I think, a lesson that I've learned somewhat slowly because I'm not a patient person by nature, but you do have to be, I think, more patient when you're dealing with the federal government. You do get some experience as governor working with foreign governments when you're trying to talk about foreign direct investment in Missouri and the trade relationship we have with foreign entities, and we do spend a lot of time interacting with foreign governments in my role today. So I think it gave some degree of preparation, but as with any interesting job, there was lots to learn, and I'm still learning something about the auto industry and foreign trade almost every day.
Which was harder, negotiating with foreign governments or negotiating with Rod Blagojevich?
I only met Rod Blagojevich one time the entire time I was governor.
Really?
No, one time. He was the governor of Illinois.
We saw it in meetings. We actually had a very successful summit that Governor Sebelius and I did in Kansas City. We do it once a year. I think we did it 4 times, and at least 3 times. I think all 4 times. And, it was a good opportunity to talk about how we cooperate together, how we could try to have what everybody always hopes for, which is a truce sort of in poaching one another's jobs. Tried to actually establish the same thing with Rod Blagojevich, but with no response. I met him one time, and it was when we finally signed we did some sort of joint bill signing for the new Mississippi River Bridge.
There's photos of you two, and I think I did a caption once. It's former Governor Matt Blunt and prisoner number X. But
he didn't even come to the White House stuff. Most of the governors go to the White House meeting and that sort of thing. He didn't go to that either.
Well, before we kind of offer a little bit of a take on your 4 years as governor, what do you see as your major achievements during that term? And you also probably should make it clear to listeners about why you decided not to run for re-election. Because I remember when that happened. That was in.
We'll get to that, Joe.
I know, but the point is, it kind of shook. It was one of the first of what turned out to be a series of stunning things that happened in Missouri politics over the next 10 years. I think.
So, I had a real opportunity, I think, to sort of reset Missouri state government. It was, as you know, the first Republican governor with a Republican legislature in 80 years. And I think we were able to do substantial things that benefited the state. We were able to make Missouri a better place to create jobs and economic opportunity with things like litigation reform, workers' compensation reform, other regulatory relief. Those things helped us create 70,000 net new jobs over those four years. The budget, as you all know, was in shambles with $1 billion budget deficit. We made a number of, I think, difficult but important decisions early on that allowed us to reset our footing on the state budget. And after having faced $1 billion deficit my first year, we were able to enjoy surpluses years after that. And in fact, when we left, it was the largest surplus the state had ever had, not including even the rainy day fund. So the budget, fixing a broken state budget was, I think, an important thing that we were able to accomplish. And then I think in many ways we were able to, have try to do things that established that reflected our values of personal responsibility and a belief in the importance of faith and family in Missouri.
Some people like to wax nostalgic about the mid-2000s and point to people like Charlie Shields and Mike Gibbons and yourself and others as statesmen and how it was a better time. But being in the Missouri Capitol during that time, it was probably one of the most contentious periods in recent Missouri political history. And I think it was because a Republican governor was coming in with a Republican legislature making some major policy changes. Democrats still had a lot of people in the Senate and the House, which meant that especially your decisions on Medicaid and other aspects of your administration, a torrent of criticism came your way. And I've always wanted to ask, like, how did you deal with that? Because it probably wasn't an easy thing to go from being like a state house member and secretary of state where the pressure to do things is not as high as being governor. And then you're doing all these very consequential things, but it's not being universally received like with open arms.
Yeah, well, I don't think it could be lying to say you relish criticism or relish criticism you might think was unfair at times. But if you are comfortable with your decisions, and I thought we were doing the right and necessary things for our state, then you sleep pretty well at night and get up and face the battle again. But it was a time of tremendous change for the state. There's no question about that. Change is always difficult to manage. I think we did a number of things very quickly, which I think was the right way to do it, rather than trying to spread it out over 4 years, because we believed that the change would deliver beneficial results for the people of our state.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
So I want to touch on that topic with something that you said when you announced you weren't going to run for re-election, and use that as a jumping-off point.
Some believe we seek solutions as a path to re-election. My mission, though, has never been about the next election. It was and is about making our state government worthy of the people it serves. The ability to keep change working for Missourians does not rest with a single person. This is not about who is governor. It is about embracing the ideas and values which will allow every Missourian to reach his or her full potential. Once, when asked if he were running for re-election, another governor responded, "Yes, I like being governor." When I read that, I thought at the time that I never wanted to run for any office just to hold it. I did not run for governor to have a title, but to bring change to state government. After 10 years in the United States Navy, I knocked on my first door as a candidate for office. I did not envision then that I would spend the next 10 years in state government. The habit of politicians is to remain in office, and the desire to prove oneself in the next election is strong. But after a great deal of thought and prayer, and with the knowledge that we've achieved virtually everything I set out to accomplish and more, I will not seek a second term in the upcoming election. Because I feel we've changed what I wanted to change in the first term, there's not the same sense of mission for a second.
So I've actually listened to that speech. I don't know, that probably is the first time you've heard that in a long time.
In a long time.
And
it's well said, though.
Yeah, it was well said. And I know I gave you praise at the beginning, but I have thought about what you said when I've listened to that in the recent past. And, you know, people were coming up with all sorts of reactions when you said that they thought there was some other reason, like you couldn't beat Jay Nixon or other things. But it really did seem like you wanted to move on and do something else and not just be a elected official anymore. And you may have been more comfortable doing something with like what you're doing now. That's my observation. I'd like you to kind of reflect on that decision, which, as Joe mentioned, really did change Missouri politics for a long time.
Well, it was another difficult decision to make, but I've never looked back with any regret on that decision at all. Decision, certainly from a personal standpoint, has allowed me to, spend far more time with my wife and now two sons. It was one son that I had while I was governor than would have been imaginable if I'd continued in public office. And we've got a great family life together. So certainly from that perspective, a personal perspective, I don't regret it in any way. And I do believe I'd accomplished what I was going to accomplish as governor in that first term. As I think through what I wanted to do as governor, the only thing I really never was able to accomplish was some sort of education reform around failing school districts. We tried to pass a scholarship bill, weren't successful, which was disappointing to me because I thought that was an issue that in some ways reflects the best of both parties, a Republican belief in competition and opportunity and a Democrat belief in social justice. I wish we could have delivered that, but it didn't seem to be in the cards for a term 2 either. So I think it was the right decision. I was proud of what we accomplished, and I think it did make the state a different state than it had been before. Missouri government was different after I was governor than it had been when I first took office, and was certainly proud of that and ready to move on.
I mean, arguably the most controversial decision, excuse me, you made during your tenure was you and the Republican leaders in the General Assembly cut Medicaid substantially. So there were tens of thousands of people who either lost coverage or lost at least part of their coverage or were knocked off the rolls. I mean, for good or bad. But that happened. Then Attorney General Jay Nixon, after he became governor, spent 8 years trying to get some of those people back on or trying to expand Medicaid. That didn't happen. Missouri remains one of the most restrictive states in the country when it comes to Medicaid eligibility. Looking back, I mean, now it's because this happened in, 2005?
Yeah, I think it's been about 14 years.
Yeah.
And before you ask your question, we should also note, and I'm sure you're going to mention, there was a very major restructuring of Medicaid that happened in 2007. So continue.
Correct. But my point being that was probably the most dramatic change in the state's Medicaid program ever. And it's been in more than a decade since then. And while there's been battles about it, it really hasn't changed. I mean, so
right.
I'm just interested.
I
in
think
your
that
thoughts.
is proof that it was the right thing to do. I don't think anybody's ever presented a serious plan to go back to the old Medicaid that was clearly something the state could not afford. We were spending over a third of our budget on Medicaid, which at the time was very high compared to other states. It was stifling our ability to make investments in education. And while I was governor, we increased education funding every single year because that's how you invest in the future, by investing in education. I think the fact that, again, that there's not been any real serious plan or effort to go back is meaningful. There was a big change. A lot of the change in terms of reducing the number of people in the program was just focused around actually doing a better job verifying eligibility. About half the people that came off because of better eligibility verification. But it was challenging. And we spent a lot of time on as we prepared the first budget. And then, as you point out, we also learned one thing I think you learn as you dig into Medicaid, certainly the Medicaid that existed then, it's not very good health care. So we tried through Missouri Health Net to create a better system with greater access where folks would have a medical home, where we'd actually provide higher reimbursements to providers so that they'd actually see Medicaid patients, and we made some progress on all those fronts.
But since then, I mean, while I think your efforts were, I mean, you were trying to make things better, the state has rejected arguably about $10 billion in federal money for the expansion because they didn't do it. Part of it's for political reasons. B, in rural Missouri, where you're very well grounded, a lot of these rural hospitals have folded since you've been out of office, in part because of the failure of Medicaid to expand. I'm just interested, when you're looking at this now, I mean, granted you're in something else, but just kind of your thoughts about, did things work out the way you thought, or did you think something else was going to happen?
Well, at the time, I wouldn't have never predicted Obamacare, so it would have been, things didn't work out the way I thought because I wouldn't have thought that the federal government would step in with a massive expansion of Medicaid as it did under Obamacare. But based on what the facts we had then, the environment we had then, I think it was the right thing to do. And I think Missouri was well served by it and remained in good fiscal condition because of it.
And one program and proposal that I think gets lost in the memory hole that I want to talk about before we talk about present day is Insure Missouri. I'm sure you remember that it was like a program aimed at providing subsidized insurance for the working poor. And it didn't end up passing because it was in the last year of your term.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of got entangled in a fight between like House members wanting to change how hospitals are regulated. I always wondered if that was a missed opportunity because it seems like that could have been, had it passed and been implemented, a way to essentially achieve the goals of the Affordable Care Act by offering more people insurance. I'm not sure if you've thought about that particular program since it didn't end up passing, but I'd be interested in your perspective on that, because I do remember it, and I've always thought since Obamacare came along, like, that could have been what Missouri could have done to get more people health care, essentially. So what's your thoughts?
I think it would have been a way to expand, and I don't remember all the details of the program. But
it was 10 years ago, so it's
exactly.
fair.
So, but it was a good way to expand access to care and to expand access to insurance, and to really leverage public money to do that. It would have taken, I think, some waivers with the federal government, if I remember some of the details, particularly around dish payments and that sort of thing. But we think it would have. I thought at the time it would work, and was a supporter of it.
Now, I do want to bring this up. I mean, I don't want to get too caught in the weeds, but as the former governor, and I know his last year, fair or unfair, got embroiled in a controversy over email record retention by the governor's office. If stuff was being deleted, there became a huge controversy over whether or not the General Assembly should be preserving records. Because, in fact, I mean, the last year of your governorship, it was caught up in that, but that was also like when people were really paying attention more to like emails and electronic communications. I mean, 10 years from now, now, no one would even think about. I mean, it's taking over everything. I'm just interested in your thoughts, because it seemed to be a precursor of things to come, and the General Assembly is still fighting over whether or not to retain emails and that sort of thing. Looking back, did that whole controversy affect the other issues that you would have liked to have dealt with, but you were having to deal with on the side? I'm just interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the time I generally thought it was ridiculous controversy based on a bunch of accusations that were unfounded from a not very strong source. But it's not something I've spent a lot of time dwelling on since I left office. I think you may remember, I think eventually I decided, and part of my reluctance was I was concerned that any governor and future governors would really become worried about how they'd interact with their staff in a candid manner if every document was going to be released, which is essentially what that does.
Yeah, prescient here.
So I think you may have actually been in the group that went through all the emails when I did release them. There was a little party of reporters. I can't imagine how exciting that was.
It was probably very exciting.
Eventually I decided to release all my emails, and also we instituted what we didn't have before, which was actually a permanent email retention system, so that they all were indeed retained. So, those are decisions in retrospect I might have gotten to more quickly if I had to do it over again. But there was a lot to think about how you were going to bind future governors in terms of how they interact with their staff.
And I just want to give you some credit here, because we went through a governorship where somebody who was embroiled in controversy did not talk to the press and did not answer questions. Joe and I were talking. You answered a whole host of questions about this and dove face first into the controversy, so to speak. And I always respected you for that. And, not everybody would have done that.
Yeah, just because as a journalist, and I will say this. There are governors. Mel Carnahan was like this. You were like this. You could always get you after a news conference. In fact, that was one of the cudgels I used against Nixon, so that they would start doing that, saying, well, Blunt did it.
I'm giving a lot of credit to the person sitting behind you, Rich Christmer.
Yeah, because, I think it does help if the governors, even during all this controversy over emails, when you had a press conference on something else, roads or whatever, you would still take time to talk to reporters about who had other questions on their minds. And I think that did, Carnahan did that, but not everybody wants to do that. Nixon got pretty good at it, but Greitens from your own party did not. And I think that helped contribute to his downfall, because there was no communication. Mm-hmm. He wasn't able to get his message out on some of the controversies surrounding him. But it seems when you look at your tenure and you look at Greitens' tenure, although there was different things, but some of his problems stem from things that you tackled and dealt with, like the email retention and communications, internal communications in your staff, which may sound kind of wonky to our listeners, but it's a big deal. It's a big deal, the fact that you set up a record retention policy, and they came up with a different system, Greitens did, to try to circumvent.
Right.
Yeah.
It's obviously the press has an an important role to play. I think I maybe answered questions at length sometimes to my staff's dismay, but I enjoyed the give and take. I think there's a lot of well-informed questions out there, and when folks ask questions, I tried to answer them. And maybe sometimes I shouldn't have, but I always tried to answer all the questions.
You're a great seguer, Governor, because let's talk about one of the wackier questions that you asked. This was actually the last time that I saw you before your Lincoln Day speech, which we'll touch on very briefly. This was when you pardoned a couple of turkeys in front of the governor's mansion.
I hereby pardon Turkules and Stewie. He will not be coming to a dinner table near you anytime soon, and we've taken them off the chopping block, and they will have a very pleasant existence with Missouri school children. Thank you all. Things about the pardoning these turkeys.
Do you have any reaction to the fact that the turkey you pardoned last year died of obesity?
We're still trying to confirm the actual cause of death, but I've heard that's a potential reason. But he had several pleasant months, and we have confirmed that he was not consumed. He was not consumed by anybody. I don't know what the natural lifespan of a turkey is. Perhaps somebody here knows. How long should a turkey live? Anybody?
So the governor, the thing that I cannot believe about that clip is you actually asked reporters for questions, because I was not expecting that. But I often play that clip around Thanksgiving just as a humorous thing, but also just to point out that I don't think there's been a turkey pardoning since your turkey pardoning. And it also is kind of a showcase that they have unintended consequences, I suppose.
Yeah, so there's a lot of turkeys who've been consumed since then.
Since then, indeed.
So
you have an obsession with gobbles, Jason. Won't die.
I won't die. So the last thing I want to touch on, because I know we're running short on time, is I want to play a clip from Lincoln Days where you talk about the future of the Republican Party.
And this is just recent.
Missouri's current constitution was adopted in 1945. And since then, there have actually been only 6 years in that entire period. We had a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate. And when we report to the electorate in 2020, it will still have only been 8 years with a Republican House, Republican governor, Republican Senate, in the more than 7 decades since that Constitution was adopted. And it's the case today, of course, that we have a Republican House, a Republican governor, and a Republican Senate. And that is a great reward for a lot of hard work that all of you have been engaged in for years, and in some cases, decades. It's a great reward, but it is also a tremendous responsibility. Because when we face the voters in 2020, they'll have a right to ask what we've done with that opportunity. What have we accomplished for the people of Missouri? And we know there won't be anybody else to blame because of this unique circumstance we have in our state.
So the question I wanted to pose to you as a final thought, how do you think Republicans now can avoid the situation you alluded to, where Republicans won in 2004, and then by 2008, Democrats won most of the offices besides lieutenant governor? Different dynamics at play, like you won the governorship very narrowly, whereas the statewide office holders won by a large margin due to Trump. So clearly the dynamics in Missouri have changed. But I'd be interested for you to elaborate on, like, what is your general message to Republicans, and particularly Governor Mike Parson as he goes into his first election?
Sure, and I think Missouri has changed. As Missourians have watched Washington Democrats, they've decided they don't want a part of that, and it's become a more Republican state. But what the legislature and the governor do over the next couple of years has, tremendous impact on what happens in the election. And they have to demonstrate that they're able to work together and tackle big problems. I don't know that Mike Parson needs any advice from me. He's, I think, doing just a great job. But my advice would be to continue to do what he's doing, which is maintain this strong relationship with the legislature, where he's constantly interacting with them, trying to identify priorities that they have and that he has that they can work on together. I think he is really doing it, and he's really done a great job. And as a Missourian, I'm grateful that he was able to really pull our state out of an embarrassing crisis and restore some credibility to state government, which I think he did almost immediately, given his presence and persona.
What do you think are the big issues that have really changed since you were governor? I mean, you forged kind of an alliance with labor. You didn't go after right to work and stuff, which Republicans since then have. I'm just interested in your thoughts, looking at what's going on in the state and then going forward.
Yeah, and I don't know if we had an alliance with labor. If you look at workers' compensation reform or employment compensation reform we passed, I think they were generally opposed to those things. But we did have, I think, an open working relationship where we were able to talk about issues. And I've always been proud of the fact that labor leaders would tell me that I never that I always did exactly what I told them I was going to do, and never backed away from any commitment that I'd made to them.
Governor, I just want to thank you again for your time this afternoon. It was, again, a real joy to see you again and talk with you at length about your legacy and what you're doing now. And as I said to you at Lincoln Days, I'm just overjoyed to see you on Twitter and see how great you and your family are doing, because I enjoyed covering you in Missouri politics, but I'm heartened that you're kind of out of it now and having your own life right now.
Now, where do you live?
We live on a farm about 50 miles west of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
We have some sheep that are lambing right now, and then we have about 35 mother cows that will calve in the next few months. So
well, I think
it's a lot of fun. Good for the boys and good for me.
You can follow, I guess, your exploits on Twitter and your farm animals at Matt Blunt. Is that what it's at?
Matt Blunt.
You can follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
And you can follow me on Twitter at J Rosenbaum. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Governor. Until next time, so long.
Thank you.